So, rule number one, and the rule from which all the other rules flow in some fashion or the other, has to do with self responsibility. Have the courage to take responsibility for yourself first, your own thoughts, feelings, and actions. What I call the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful. This goes to the issue of being able to own your own process, your internal thoughts and feelings, and how these translate to your external interpersonal behavior. And this is kind of difficult for people to do, partly from a neurobiological perspective, because the image of we hold in ourself is oftentimes held in the right brain, and that's kind of an idealized way we see ourselves. But to really look at ourselves critically, we have to utilize our frontal cortex and look at the evidence to things, which a lot of times we hide things from ourselves because we have this idealized self. In assessment class, that's why people have difficulty with social desirability, because they have a certain way of seeing themselves. Sorry, my dog is chewing on a bone. In addition to taking responsibility for yourself, it's important to refuse to take responsibility for others. Instead, make a commitment to be responsible to others by forming agreements with them. It's okay that you and others have your own boundaries, your own separate thoughts, feelings, and actions. And learn to confront yourself before confronting other people. Don't be hypocritical, and make sure you take the log out of your own eye first and be able to admit when you're wrong first. That's something that some people are able to do very well. My wife does that very well. She's able to take responsibility for herself and say, look, what I'm willing to take responsibility for is A, B, and C. And that helps to reduce my anxiety and tension in the moment because it tells me she's willing to be fair. Rule number two, practice verbal chivalry. Chivalry is a term we don't utilize very much anymore. In the Middle Ages, chivalry was a concept to not take any undue power over your opponent. If a knight in a tournament, for instance, were fighting another chivalrous knight and the first knight dropped his sword, a chivalrous knight would allow him to pick his sword up to make it a fair contest between the two. So it's more than just fairness, it's really going the extra mile and trying to be extra fair in the process, because people try to control in this verbal game with each other. So refuse to take undue power in the relationship with verbal games. This goes to the issue of one's willingness to play fair in conflict. Do not tell people how they are, tell them how you experience them, which means you need to take responsibility for your own perceptions of things and use I statements instead of you statements. Say what you mean and mean what you say. That means no double talk. Many people utilize double talk in conflict. They'll say things at different levels, and it's very confusing for people to ferret that out. Like, for instance, the story of the schizophrenogenic mother who came to visit her son in a mental hospital, and she berates her son for not coming and giving his mother a hug, and when he does, she stiffens up in her body language. So that's kind of double talk. She's saying one thing with her words and something else with her process, external process. No sarcasm in conflict, because when you're using sarcasm, you don't mean what you say and say what you mean. You're saying the opposite of what you mean, and it muddies the waters between people. And remember, you're responsible for your own words and actions and agreements that you form with others. Take turns talking, which means no interrupting and no filibustering either. Interrupting everybody knows about, but filibustering is something to do in Congress when they want to kill a bill. They just talk on and on and on about everything in order to eat up the time so that the bill won't pass. Some people do the same thing in conflict. They just keep talking and talking and talking, and they refuse to let the other person get a word in edgewise, which means they're controlling the interpersonal space between them. And refuse to skew the person towards the negative. People do this in conflict a lot. They're less than fair with this because they'll say things like always or never. You never do this, you always do that. And things are rarely ever always or never. So we need to be able to be clear to, if we do use always or never, we need to be able to say, and I mean always, or and I mean never. I can't even think of one example to the contrary. So be fair when characterizing the other person and do not throw them under the bus. These are just some of the ways. I'm not saying these are all the ways that people play verbal games, but they're, the top 4 or 5 or so that people tend to do to try to control the process between them. Rule number 3, if I can get us there. Give generously, but only what you're willing to give away. This goes to the issue of how a person gives in the world, either from an internal locus of control or an external locus of control. People oftentimes say they had to give. I had to go. I had to do this. I have to go to work. I have to go to the other thing. Instead of taking responsibility for, they choose to go to work. Or they choose to give to somebody in some way. I choose to go to the party with my wife. I choose to go someplace that I might not want to go. But I choose to go because I love him or her. When you give out of obligation or manipulation, nobody wins. And it's really important to not engage in covert contracts, which is giving something and then expecting something in return. Try to give to others in ways that are meaningful to them. But again, only what you're willing to give away. And do not expect others to meet all of your needs. You need to learn to give to yourself in meaningful ways as well. And ultimately, when it comes to giving, to treat others with love and respect the way you want to be treated. And this goes to the issue of how people just generally are in their relationship. Are you patient? Do you tend to be kind? Do you treat the other person the way you want to be treated? If you make a mistake, does your partner rub your nose in it? Do you rub your partner's nose in it? How do you choose to give in the world? But whatever you choose to give, make sure that you're willing to give it away and not give with any strings attached. All right? That resumes this, or that concludes this portion. We'll continue with rule number 4 soon.